Lecture 1, Native America. It is believed people first migrated by land to North America over the Bering Strait or by sea across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans anywhere from 15 to 25,000 years ago. However, there is archaeological evidence of human habitation in South America as early as 20 to 40,000 years ago. There is also evidence of sea crossings from the west, Polynesia, following the Pacific Ocean currents, and the east, Europe, where seafarers followed the glacial sea ice of the last ice age, which stretched at times hundreds of miles farther south than it does today. Facing a warming climate and hunting animals such as the woolly mammoth and giant bison into extinction, these first settlers later developed agriculture, including the cultivation of maize, squash, and beans that enabled large settled civilizations to emerge. The variety of Indian societies first encountered by Europeans included civilizations with populations of several million people, large cities, road and irrigation systems, trade networks, and impressive architectural achievements. But even the most developed Indian civilizations located in South America lacked the technology such as metal tools, machines, gunpowder, and scientific knowledge needed for long-distance navigation. In North America, about 3,500 years ago, one native culture, the Mound Builders, centered their community in the lower Mississippi River Valley around a series of semicircular mounds and established extensive trade networks throughout the continent. For over 3,000 years, in what is now northeastern Arizona, the Hopi and Zuni and their ancestors lived in settled villages with irrigation, dam, and canal systems, as well as engaging in long-distance trade, becoming, after a period of decline, what the Spanish called the Pueblo Indians. The Pacific Coast was also densely populated by hundreds of independent groups of natives who lived primarily by fishing and gathering food. And on the Great Plains, many Indians hunted the buffalo herds, while others lived in agricultural villages. In eastern North America, hundreds of tribes, from the Choctaw, Cherokee, and Chickasha in the southeast to the Iroquois in the northeast, lived by hunting, fishing, gathering, and agriculture, and engaged each other in trade, diplomacy, and war. When Europeans arrived, native peoples were tremendously diverse and differentiated by language, custom, political system, and religious belief. They did not consider themselves a single unified people with a common cultural or racial identity. North American Indian societies did have some common characteristics. Their religions and religious practices were often directly related to farming and hunting, investing living things like plants and animals and non-living things like water and wind with spiritual power, and defined membership in their communities. Each Indian society respected and gave authority to those who seemed to have spiritual or supernatural powers. Both European and Native American religions did not distinguish sharply between the natural and the supernatural, or the secular and the religious. Unlike Europeans, North American Indian societies did not treat land as a commodity to be owned privately by individuals, but instead had family and communal-based notions of property. However, native groups did view land as theirs in the sense that they hunted the land, lived on it, and used its resources, as well as viewing some land as sacred spaces reserved for their ancestors. The fact that native peoples resisted European encroachment suggests they certainly felt that the land was theirs and that Europeans weren't entitled to take it and use it by force. Tribes would go to war to protect their hunting and fishing grounds. While it is true that Indians and Europeans viewed the selling of land in treaties and the use of land differently, the romantic notion of native peoples always living in harmony with man and nature is a Hollywood myth and distorts reality. Relations between men and women were also markedly different from those of Europeans. Some North American Indian societies were matrilineal, and in some groups it was possible for women to own property, engage in premarital sex, divorce their husbands, take part in religious ceremonies, and help select male tribal leaders. Men assumed political leadership and proved their masculinity by engaging in hunting, agriculture, or warfare. Europeans first tended to see Indians as either noble savages or uncivilized and brutal inferior barbarians. Over time, negative images of Indians came to dominate Europeans' view of indigenous people, with Europeans focusing on the natives' apparent lack of religion, land use practices, and gender relations as the basis of their relative inferiority. Indians were seen as people who didn't use the land properly, which in the eyes of the English, French, and Dutch justified their expropriation of the land, and as people who subverted European gender roles by allowing weak men to engage in leisure activities like hunting and fishing, leaving agricultural work to native women, whom Europeans believed women's main priority was raising the next generation to adulthood. Some Europeans saw Native Americans as embodying freedom and liberty, as Europeans understood the term. But most soon thought that such notions of freedom were foreign to native societies. Europeans believed Indians were savages in part because they did not seem to have governments or legal systems, lacking the respect for authority, discipline, and order which Europeans believed marked their civilization. The modern idea of freedom as personal independence, often based on the ownership of private property, meant little in most Indian societies. But Indians did have their own ideas of freedom, as is evident in the practice of small-scale slavery in some Indian groups, and in their resistance to enslavement by Europeans. Although Indians respected individual thought and judgment that conflicted with group decisions, Indians generally emphasized commitment to family and community, group autonomy and self-determination, and mutual obligations, accompanied by belonging and connectedness over individual freedom.